Hey guys, so I have been doing a little shopping, not too much, but earlier on today I bought some RAM for my PC upstairs, but yesterday I bought a laptop to replace this one. I might keep this one as well, but I'll see. But the laptop doesn't come for a week or two, and I'll have to buy RAM for that as well because it only comes with one 8GB stick. Now I've been looking at which modules to buy and things like that, and there's a lot of really bad information out there, a lot of misinformation out there as well. Now, I'm not claiming to be an expert on random access memory. I know what it is, but I've looked at technical discussions before as far as latency, increased RAM versus memory speed, and all these different things. Normally, these discussions end up being about the bottleneck, coming from the motherboard or the CPU or whatever, and it also depends on the application that you're using. But there have been really technical discussions that I've read an article about, or into a forum, and at a certain point I get lost because that's not where my experience lies. But if you look online, there's a lot of misinformation on there, on forums, on Reddit, on social media, and also on tech websites. And one of the things I don't like is that there's a lot of people speaking in absolutes, and they will say no one needs X amount of RAM, they don't need 32 gigabytes of RAM, or no one needs 64 gigabytes of RAM. And these people always speak as if they're experts. They'll say no one needs that, your OS uses this, and they'll kind of list how much memory particular applications use. Now that to me is really, really bad advice. Saying that no one needs more RAM is very bad advice. Now I realise that most general users have got an idea of how much RAM they use, but there's a lot of people out there that just think that using the internet or using a computer is nothing more than a few games and a browser and maybe something else. But a lot of people use a lot more than that. But the thing is, it's a little bit of a silly thing to say in the first place anyway, because you're on Windows, go into Task Manager, you can see exactly how much memory that you're using. So saying that no one needs to buy 16 or 32 or 64 gigabytes of RAM is really bad advice. You buy the amount of RAM that you need. That's it. Sounds very simplistic, saying that sounds very obvious, but it's true. If you need a particular or a specific amount of RAM, buy it. It really isn't that difficult. Of course, to do that, you need to have a laptop or a PC already. Very simple though. Open up Task Manager or whatever operating system you're using. Just open it up, monitor your memory usage, and just open up the applications that you would normally use. For me here, the browser, Photoshop, maybe open up a few different things. But I can see here that I'm using, just with Chrome and just with Photoshop and a few images open, I've got like 10 tabs open here. I'm researching an article, but I can see that I'm using 14 gigabytes already. And that's one of the reasons why I upgraded from 16 to 32, because there was many situations where performance was hindered. Now there's other things to take into account here. Performance could also be related to CPU and the GPU and different things. But here I can see, and I can look at the memory, and I can see that these applications are using this memory. I need more RAM to improve the system. It's a very simple thing to work out, really, if you look at it. So all these people saying that you don't need X amount of RAM, they're wrong. They are wrong. It really does depend on what your needs are. Now, one of the most common statements that I see, and I've seen it dozens of times, and also on websites, is that no one needs 32 gigabytes of RAM. Now, this is obviously coming from a gaming perspective, because right now, in 2019, 16 gigabytes of RAM is more than enough for most top games. It really is. But fast forward a year or two, 32 gigabytes might be the standard. But I think a lot of people are maybe looking at it from their own perspective, and they don't realize that other people need more. Now, my example upstairs, my PC upstairs, I've got an 8700K, which I wouldn't mind upgrading as well. But before, I had 32 gigabytes of RAM. It's got four memory slots in the motherboard. I was using two 16 gigabytes sticks. But I've just added 2 more. So tomorrow I will have 64 gigabytes of RAM. Interestingly, I've got the exact same sticks as before, Vengeance LPX 3200. And 2 years ago, less than 2 years ago in fact, I paid £320, and the exact same RAM kit cost me £125 today. It's amazing. 320 down to 125, brand new in 2 years. It's insane. So it's so much cheaper to get additional RAM just now. But I'm sure there's still some of you right now who disagree with me and you say you don't need this RAM, you're throwing your money away. But from my perspective, from what I'm doing online with video, this is something I should have upgraded a while ago. There's been a lot of situations recently where I've been limited by the fact that that PC only has 32 gigabytes of RAM. Now, generally, if I'm just browsing, if I'm just using Photoshop, if I'm just doing kind of what I would call light work, less intensive work, 32 gigabytes is more than enough. I might idle around at 14, 15 gigabytes and only spike up to 32, every now and then. But there are many situations where I will need 64 gigabytes of RAM. Now, a good example of this is a few weeks ago, I did a review of the Elgato HD60S, which is a video capture device, and I recorded some footage from my Sony camera. Now, recording the footage is fine. Editing the footage is a different story. I recorded these clips in 4K and I had to clip a few of them together, and it got to a point in Premiere Pro where I just couldn't scrub, I call it scrubbing, but I couldn't play back the video, which means that I couldn't edit it. My system started freezing and my RAM was at 32 gigabytes of RAM. And that has been my general experience with that system upstairs. It's got 32 gigabytes of RAM. The CPU is actually fine. The GPU is fine in most situations. It's the RAM that's holding me back. And basically, if I am editing a 1080p video, it depends on what's happening in that video. This Surface Pro 6 here only has 8 gigabytes of RAM. But for a basic 1080p video, as in I record a video, I put it on, just add a little bit of text and upload it, that can handle it. Same with this PC. When you start to do a little bit more, well, that's where things get a little bit more difficult. And this one, if I add a few 1080p clips and I try and clip them together, I can't play back things quickly. I can't, it just can't handle it. This laptop just is not powerful enough for it. Upstairs, well, 1080p videos, most 1080p videos are fine, but there's been a few situations where when I've put a few 1080p videos clipped together and I've edited them and I've tried to go from one to the other, to try and make the video look better or reflect back on something that happened before, then it stalls and Premiere Pro freezes and I can't play it back in the editor, which basically, in certain videos, it's doubled the amount of editing time because there's been so many freezes where I can't do it. And there are some workarounds that you can drop the resolution of the playback and all that, but again, it hurts the experience. It doesn't really help with every situation. But that's just with 1080p. And when you jump up to 4K clips, it's a different story altogether. But even from technical websites, I was looking at a website there and they were saying for 64 gigabytes or more, that's only for editing 8K, which is ridiculous because I know from editing 4K that there's no way I could edit 8K with 64 gigabytes of RAM. There's no way. It's going to be more. And that's the thing, I've got this laptop coming, it can handle 128 gigabytes of RAM, and I can stick 64 in it, quad channel, 4 16 gigabyte sticks, and that's perfect for me for the next 2 years. It might be idling along 16 gigabytes, it might spike up to 35 or 36 for video editing, or 40 or even 50 in certain situations, but 64 gigabytes will be enough in that laptop. But there is a good argument when buying RAM for a laptop especially, to buy higher capacity modules. So instead of me having 4 16s, I could buy 2 32 gigabyte sticks and have 64 gigabytes dual channel, and then down the line I just have to fill up those 2 additional slots and I've got 128 if down the line I need that. 64 is without doubt what I need just now. But again, it comes down to what your needs are. It's a little bit frustrating because you see a lot of people here and they obviously know what they're talking about as far as the technical aspect about it, but I think the big problem is that people can't see outside of their own box. They only see what they're doing, and because they're not using a lot of memory or they're not using a lot of CPU or GPU, whatever, they think that everyone else shouldn't as well. And it's really not that complicated. Just look at the applications that you're using, open up the applications, and when you run into any problems, monitor the memory, monitor the CPU and the GPU, and just look at what's spiking. That will help you see what is holding you back. And with video editing, RAM, it's a factor. It's not the be all and end all, but it's certainly something that was holding me back, which is why I have upgraded. So I'm not an expert on any of this. I don't suggest that I am, but I do think there's a lot of bad information out there as far as what you should do. And there's a lot of strange decisions coming from tech companies as well. I opted for 8 gigabytes here because jumping up from 8 to 16 gigabytes was another like £400–500, which is insane, which is why I don't have 16 gigabytes of RAM here. It was basically just, yeah, they're taking the piss, let's be honest. Charging an extra 500 to go from 8 to 16 is ridiculous. Microsoft are really bad for that. But you know, basic editing, basic videos and stuff, 8 gigabytes fine. It really is. 16 gigabyte for, you know, Chrome, Photoshop, or just some light gaming. But if you're doing anything intensive CAD, yeah, you want to go up. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, guys. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this. I'm sure there's still some of you saying you don't need that memory, but anyone who edits videos, anyone who does anything intensive with video or After Effects or anything graphical, you'll know where I'm coming from, where I say that RAM does help in many, many situations, and it does stop you from losing a lot of time. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll speak to you all very soon. Take care.